The fluorescent lights hum their mechanical prayer over Cedar Creek Medical's antiseptic corridors, and Elena Martinez moves through them like a ghost who learned to clock in. Her scrubs are navy, her name badge reads Elena Martinez, RN, and nothing about her suggests the hands that once field-stripped a rifle in 47 seconds flat or held a child's body together through 17 hours of Helmand dust and mortar fire. She checks the 4 line in room 312 with the kind of precision that makes senior nurses uncomfortable, the kind that suggests she knows something they don't. The pulse oximeter glows softly on the nightstand. Sinus rhythm. Normal. Everything normal. Everything except the slight tremor in her fingers when she touches the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket, the one worn smooth from 20 years of worry, the one she pressed into a 7-year-old boy's palm in Helmand Province in 2004, never imagining that child would return to her as anything other than a memory she'd buried in the classified sections of her own erasure. It is 6:51 a.m. Morning rounds. Elena pushes the medication cart down the hallway toward the conference room, its wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum, the kind of sound that makes people look up or look away. Colleagues nod at her. Nobody asks her name. The nurses' station is already crowded with the day shift arriving, residents pulling up labs on tablets, attendings reviewing overnight notes. Elena knows these people the way you know background characters in someone else's story. She exists beside them. Not with them. The faint scars tracing her forearms, thin white lines from shrapnel, from IED shrapnel, from things that never appeared in any medical record, are visible if you look, but nobody looks. She triple-checks every medication order before administration. Unusual. Unnecessary. The kind of behavior that makes people wonder. Dr. James Caldwell arrives at 7:14 a.m. with his silver hair perfectly styled and his white coat pressed like he sleeps in it. 58 years old. Board-certified surgeon. Connected to 3 hospital board members through a web of country club memberships and political favors that flow like underground rivers beneath the surface of institutional power. His presence makes the air pressure change. People straighten. People quiet. He is the kind of man who has spent 3 decades being right, or at least being in control of who gets to decide what right looks like. Dr. Caldwell moves through morning rounds like he owns the hospital, because in a way, he does. His white coat trails behind him like a cape. His voice carries the effortless authority of someone who has never been questioned successfully, who has systematized the questioning itself so thoroughly that by the time you speak, you've already lost. He discusses vitals and medication adjustments with the residents clustered around him like nervous satellites. Elena stands at the back of the group pushing her medication cart, watching, listening, invisible. In room 308, he orders a patient's morning metoprolol increased from 50 mg to 100 mg without checking the baseline heart rate, without reviewing the overnight telemetry strips. His confidence is absolute. His thinking is efficient, if not quite accurate. Elena steps forward. Doctor. Her voice is soft. Not deferential, she was trained too well to sound actually subservient, but quiet. Calm. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. The patient's baseline is 52. An increase to 100 might, she doesn't finish. She doesn't need to. She is a nurse correcting a surgeon. The hierarchy crack appears instantly. The silence after her words is the silence that comes before someone decides whether to smile or strike. Dr. Caldwell's jaw tightens. His eyes narrow just slightly. Nobody speaks. The residents suddenly find their tablets fascinating. The patient, Dr. Caldwell says slowly, will receive the 100 mg dose as ordered. His voice carries the kind of precision that isn't about volume. It's about absolute certainty. His eyes meet Elena's for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for her to recognize that she has just been noted. Catalogued. Marked. The rounds continue. Elena pushes her cart. She says nothing else. The medication order is given to the patient as written, and when the heart rate drops to 38 beats per minute, nobody traces it back to the moment when a nurse tried to prevent exactly this outcome. That is how power works at Cedar Creek Medical. It isn't about being right. It's about being the person who decides what right looks like. Elena distributes the morning medications in silence, and Dr. Caldwell watches her from across the nurse's station like someone studying a problem he has not yet decided how to solve. At 11:53 a.m., Elena pushes through the cafeteria doors. She eats alone. Salad. Coffee black. She sits at the corner table with her back to the wall, muscle memory from 17 years ago, and reads through patient charts on her tablet, the blue light washing her face in a hospital glow that makes everyone look slightly haunted. The cafeteria smells like industrial cheese and something that might have been chicken once. The lunch crowd is thinning. Elena barely registers the moment Dr. Caldwell enters with 2 attending physicians, both of them laughing at something he has said. He sees her. She doesn't see him until his shadow falls across her food tray. Sweetheart. The word lands like the first drop of rain before a storm. Elena looks up. Dr. Caldwell is standing at her table. His smile is present but his eyes are not. How's that little correction working out for you? His colleagues are watching now. She can feel their attention shifting, the way attention moves when something is about to happen. The question isn't a question. It's a setup. It's a test to see if she will defend herself or disappear. Elena sets down her fork. She doesn't move, doesn't flinch, doesn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her calculate her response. Her jaw tightens for half a second. Just half a second. Her hands remain steady as he reaches out and sweeps her lunch tray sideways off the table. The plate crashes against the floor. The salad scatters across the linoleum in a pattern that looks almost accidental if you don't know better. Carrots rolling. Dressing spreading like spilled blood. The sound draws every eye in the cafeteria. Colleagues pause mid-bite. The chatter stops. The fluorescent lights buzz above them all, indifferent to humiliation. Dr. Caldwell picks her patient charts up from the table, the one she was reading, and holds them at shoulder height for exactly 3 seconds before dropping them to the floor next to the scattered salad. The papers spread across the tile. His smile doesn't waver. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he says quietly, and the quiet is the worst part because it means he is so certain of his control that he doesn't need to raise his voice. His colleagues laugh, not the nervous laugh of people unsure about what they are watching, but the comfortable laugh of people who know exactly what they are witnessing and approve. The hierarchy working perfectly. Power demonstrating its own mechanism. Elena doesn't move for exactly 2 seconds. Then she bends. Her movements are mechanical. Her face is unreadable, the face of someone who has practiced being unreachable, who learned a long time ago that the only way to win is to refuse to be hurt. She gathers the papers with precision. One by one. The salad she leaves on the floor. She stands, the scattered documents in her hands, and she does not make eye contact with Dr. Caldwell. She simply moves past him toward the trash. Behind her, she hears the comfortable resumption of conversation. The incident is already being filed away by witnesses who will, if asked, claim they saw nothing unusual. Just a nurse. Just a careless employee. Just another reminder of how the hospital works when nobody important is watching. Elena walks to the supply closet on the 3rd floor. Nobody is there. Nobody ever is. The fluorescent lights are slightly dimmer here, the shelves organized with brutal precision, oxygen tubing, syringes, bandages, the infrastructure of care stacked neatly in the dark. She closes the door. The sound is small and final. She reaches into her scrub pocket and removes the tarnished challenge coin, worn smooth from 2 decades of worry. It is made from aircraft wreckage and shrapnel, the specific shrapnel from the IED that took out the convoy when she was carrying that 7-year-old through Helmand Province. She had molded the metal on her own time, had pressed it into the boy's hand, had whispered words in Pashto that translate roughly to "You will survive this, and someday you will remember." She had never expected to see him again. She had been erased from every database in 2004. Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, Navy SEAL reconnaissance operative, was dead. Officially. Legally. Completely. The coin catches the light. Her fingers trace its edges, and for exactly 7 seconds, the trembling that she never allows in public surfaces. The trembling is not fear. The trembling is restraint. It is the physical manifestation of 17 years of keeping her hand steady, her voice calm, her composure intact while men like Dr. Caldwell built empires out of institutional power and never once understood what power actually looks like. She closes her hand around the coin. She closes her eyes. Sinus rhythm. Normal. Everything normal. Except the soft sound of a stretcher rolling down the hallway outside, and the voice of an orderly calling up to the 4th floor, room 347. Special Forces patient, transfer from Atlanta. Post-surgical monitoring. Everything stable. Elena opens her eyes. She pockets the coin. She opens the supply closet door and steps back into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hum their mechanical prayer over the corridor, indifferent to what is about to arrive on this floor. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the ghost in the navy scrubs was about to meet the reason she had been buried alive in the first place. Morning rounds at Cedar Creek Medical moved like a surgical instrument through tissue, precise, efficient, and fundamentally cold. Dr. Caldwell led the procession down the 3rd floor corridor, his silver hair catching the overhead lights in a way that suggested hours of grooming, his white coat starched to the consistency of armor. Behind him trailed 6 medical students, their notebooks open like supplicants holding prayer books, and Elena moved with them, her scrubs the color of fog, her presence the texture of background noise. That was the architecture of her existence here, visible but translucent, present but ignorable, a piece of hospital infrastructure rather than a person. Room 312, Caldwell announced, his voice carrying the timbre of absolute authority. 47-year-old female, post-cholecystectomy day 3, standard protocol. He paused at the chart, his jaw moving slightly as he read. Then he glanced sideways at Elena, and something in his expression shifted, a predator recognizing an opportunity. Nurse Martinez, refresh my memory. Did we order the standard 20 mg dose of ketorolac for post-operative pain management? Elena met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. We did, doctor. However, the patient's creatinine is elevated at 1.8. Standard protocol at Cedar Creek with compromised renal function would be 10 mg. The student's pens froze mid-note. The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Caldwell's smile never wavered, but his eyes became flat, the eyes of something studying an insect under glass. Did you perhaps misunderstand the order? I know it can be confusing for someone at your level. He turned to the students with the ease of a man accustomed to an audience. This is an excellent teaching moment. Always verify dosing, but also understand that challenging physician orders in front of patients erodes institutional authority. Martinez meant well, I'm sure. Isn't that right, Nurse Martinez? Yes, doctor, Elena said quietly. She did not look at the students. She did not defend herself. Her hands remained at her sides, steady as surgical steel. But something moved behind her eyes, in not anger, something colder. Recognition, perhaps, of a pattern that was now becoming visible. 3 days of comments, each one calibrated precisely. 3 days of public corrections designed not to correct but to diminish. 3 days of testing how far he could push before she broke. The morning rounds continued down the hallway like blood through a vein, Caldwell's voice a constant murmur of authority, and Elena followed half a step behind, a shadow with a stethoscope. She checked vitals, recorded observations, answered questions with minimum necessary words. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer overhead, indifferent to the slow architecture of humiliation being constructed beneath them. But that afternoon, everything accelerated. The cafeteria at Cedar Creek Medical sprawled across the hospital's basement like an institutional cavern, steel counters, the smell of overheated food warming under heat lamps, the constant percussion of silverware against plates. Elena sat alone at a table near the corner window, her tray arranged with the geometric precision of someone who had learned to find order in small things, turkey sandwich, side salad, black coffee in a ceramic cup. Around her, the room thrummed with conversation, doctors discussing cases, nurses comparing shift stories, the ambient sound of a hierarchy in motion. Dr. Caldwell entered at 12:38 p.m., and the moment Elena saw him moving through the crowd toward her table, she knew what was coming. The knowledge arrived as a physical sensation, a tightness in her chest that she had not felt in 20 years, the sensation of an ambush preparing to spring. He approached her table where 4 other nurses sat, all of them colleagues who had begun, over the past 72 hours, to distance themselves from Elena in the subtle ways that hierarchies survive. They greeted Caldwell with the enthusiasm of people acknowledging a visiting dignitary. He leaned against the edge of Elena's table, studying her lunch tray as if it were a crime scene. "Eating alone again, Martinez? Surprised you haven't quit yet?" His voice carried easily across the table, designed for broadcast. Cedar Creek's got high standards. Not everyone rises to the occasion. Elena lifted her sandwich. She did not respond. What happened next moved with the fluid precision of something choreographed long in advance. Caldwell shifted his weight, and his elbow caught the edge of her tray, a gesture that might have been accidental if his eyes had not been watching her face the entire time. The tray tipped. The bowl of soup cascaded across the floor in a spreading archipelago of liquid, silverware clattering against tile like metallic rain, the sandwich sliding across the white floor in a lazy arc. The sound was extraordinary, louder than it should have been, louder than seemed physically possible. The room went dead silent. 40 people stopped talking at once. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, loud enough now to hear individually. Caldwell straightened his white coat with deliberate care, his expression one of practiced concern. "Oh, my apologies," he said, his voice carrying a smile that his face did not quite display. "Sweetheart." Elena's jaw clenched for exactly half a second. A muscle moved beneath her skin, the only visible response her body permitted. Her hands remained perfectly steady as she stood and retrieved a paper towel from the dispenser near the trash. She knelt on the cafeteria floor, the tile cool against her knees even through the thin fabric of her scrubs, and began to clean with methodical precision. One paper towel soaked in soup. Another across the scattered salad. The sandwich, which she simply discarded into the trash without ceremony. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence became architectural, became a room unto itself that everyone was trapped inside. When she stood, her face was an unreadable mask. The expression of someone who had learned, 20 years ago in the dust of Helmand Province, how to absorb impact without flinching. She disposed of the soiled paper towels, returned to her seat, and opened her coffee cup. Took a sip. Caldwell moved away through the crowd, his presence seeming to restore motion to the room. Conversation resumed in low murmurs. The 4 nurses at her table began collecting their trays with urgent efficiency, departing one by one until only Elena remained, alone again, her spilled lunch replaced by silence and the understanding that she had just crossed some invisible threshold in the hospital's ecosystem. That evening, during evening rounds, Caldwell moved through the 3rd floor with the superintendent's efficiency he favored. Elena was charting in the hallway when he passed, and he simply opened her hand, still full of patient files, and let them scatter across the tile floor in a cascade of white paper. Charts descended like snow, spreading across 15 feet of corridor. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said without breaking stride. "Since you're so good at following orders." Elena knelt and retrieved them. Her hands did not tremble. Her breathing did not catch. She simply gathered each page with the care of someone handling artifacts, arranged them back into their folders, and resumed her evening. But later, alone in the supply closet, that fluorescent-lit cave of bandages and sterile gloves where no one ever looked, her fingers finally moved with something other than precision. They found the challenge coin in her pocket, the tarnished metal warm from her body heat, the surface worn smooth by 20 years of touching. She pressed it against her palm, feeling the weight of it, the texture of it, the impossible reality of it being here in her pocket while its twin somehow rested in a room down the corridor in the personal effects of a green beret who was supposed to be a stranger. She did not cry. She did not tremble in the way that civilians understood trembling. But her fingers moved across the coin with the kind of pressure that was close to pain, as if she could absorb its history through her skin, as if she could ask it silently what it was doing here, why it had come back to her, what it meant that the child she had pressed it into, blood-soaked and 8 years old on a hillside in Helmand Province, was now lying unconscious in room 347. The next morning, Caldwell sat in his office on the hospital's 4th floor, a space that commanded views of downtown Houston, that displayed degrees from prestigious universities and photographs of him with board members and city politicians. He had already made 2 phone calls. The first was to James Morrison, the hospital's chief administrator, a man with whom Caldwell played golf twice a month on Saturday mornings at the Pinnacle Club. The second was to a contact at the state licensing board. Someone owed him a favor from a situation involving a malpractice suit 3 years prior. "I'm concerned," Caldwell said into his phone, his voice carrying the kind of measured gravity that suggested confidentiality, trust, and the burden of institutional responsibility. "The Martinez nurse has shown concerning judgment patterns. Questionable background. Makes decisions outside her scope of practice. I've documented 3 incidents in the past week alone. I'm not suggesting anything, but we might want eyes on her personnel file. Her references might be worth verifying." He hung up and smiled at his reflection in the window. Downtown Houston sprawled beneath him, all of it reducible to hierarchies, all of it responsive to pressure applied at the correct leverage points. Down on the 3rd floor, Elena pulled room 347's chart from the station and reviewed the admission notes with the professional detachment that had become her default operating system. Special Forces transfer from Atlanta Trauma Center. Green Beret, 20-year service record. Post-surgical monitoring, stable vitals, routine recovery protocol. She did not yet connect the name to anything beyond a set of medical parameters. She entered room 347 at 14:33. The man in the bed was unconscious, his face relaxed in the particular vulnerability of deep sedation. Monitor cables connected to his chest like strange vines, and ran steady fluid into his left forearm. The room smelled of antiseptic and the particular mineral scent of medical-grade saline. Elena approached with the efficiency of 1,000 other patient check-ins, prepared to note vitals and move forward. Then she paused. The face triggered something, not recognition exactly, but a kind of displacement in time, as if she were looking at 2 images simultaneously, the man in the bed and a child's face from 2 decades ago, burned into her memory with the permanence of scar tissue. The same bone structure beneath the surface. The same particular shape of the eyes, now closed. The same way his hand rested open on the bedsheet, and she remembered that hand, small, blood-soaked, gripping hers as they moved through enemy territory for 17 hours while mortar fire pursued them through mountain passes. Her hand paused over the patient's chart. She forced herself to breathe normally. She checked his vitals with practiced precision, blood pressure 128/72, oxygen saturation 97% on room air, heart rate steady at 66 beats per minute. Everything normal. Everything stable. Everything impossible. Then she saw the personal effects bag on the bedside table. She did not open it. She did not need to. Even through the clear plastic, she could see the shape of a wallet, a military watch, and something small and metallic that caught the light in a way that made her entire nervous system recognize it as kin to the object in her pocket. Elena completed her assessment and left the room. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands were steady. But the challenge coin in her pocket felt suddenly heavier, as if it had absorbed gravity itself, as if it had been waiting all these years to pull her back toward something she had buried so deeply that she had managed to convince herself it was dead. She had not counted on it still being alive. By Wednesday morning, Dr. Caldwell had already made 3 calls. The first came at 6:06 a.m. from his office on the 3rd floor, where he sat in a leather chair that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, dialing a number he kept in his personal contacts. "Yes, hello, this is Dr. Marcus Caldwell from Cedar Creek Medical in Houston. I'm calling regarding one of your former employees, Elena Martinez. We're conducting a routine background verification and I wanted to cross-check some employment dates." The voice on the other end, a fabricated reference Elena had listed, a hospital administrator in Dallas who existed only on letterhead and a voicemail, had been programmed by Caldwell's assistant weeks ago. "I see some gaps in her work history that concern me. Very unusual pattern. Would you be willing to provide a written statement? The lie settled into official channels like sediment in water, unremarkable and settling. The second call came at 8:15 a.m., this time to the hospital administrator, Gerald Hampstead, his golf partner of 7 years. Gerald, I need to raise some concerns. Nothing concrete yet, but some irregularities with one of our nursing staff. Background checks, qualifications, work history that doesn't quite line up. I think we should bring in an external reviewer, just to be thorough. Risk management, you understand. The words slipped between them like currency, each phrase weighted with implication rather than evidence. I'd hate for Cedar Creek to have liability issues because we didn't ask the right questions early. The third call came at 10:36 a.m. to a consultant in Austin, a former hospital inspector who owed Caldwell a favor from a malpractice case 3 years prior. I want a full performance and credential review. Focus on nursing staff with incomplete background documentation. One nurse in particular, Elena Martinez, ICU. I need it documented and official. Timeline should be aggressive. The consultant knew better than to ask why. Caldwell's network operated on the principle that questions were unnecessary when loyalty had already been paid for in advance. Elena felt it before she understood it. The shift rotation on Thursday changed without explanation. She had been assigned to post-op recovery and the cardiac care unit, the high-profile cases, the patients with family members who signed visitor logs, the cases where competence was demonstrable and visible. Now she was reassigned to the intermediate care floor, where the patients were stable, where there was no crisis, where there was nothing to prove. The posting went live on the staff app at 2 a.m. No meeting, no discussion. Just a new name on a new list. Then came the medication access restrictions. She arrived for the morning shift and found her badge no longer granted access to the controlled substance cabinet. System update, the pharmacy tech told her, avoiding her eyes. Routine credentialing process. You'll have limited access until verification clears. The words had been fed to her, rehearsed, delivered without conviction. Elena simply nodded and requested that another nurse pull her medications for the morning rounds. She did not ask why. She did not protest. She moved on to the next task. But that night, in the break room, she caught the whisper. 2 residents were eating vending machine pizza when she entered, and their conversation cut off like a radio losing signal. One of them was shuffling his phone away from view. The silence that followed was the silence of people caught speaking about someone in the room where that someone could hear. Elena poured her coffee with steady hands, her jaw clenching for half a second before her face reset to professional blankness. The smell of burnt coffee and stale microwaved popcorn hung in the air like a warning. She sat 3 tables away, and they left within 2 minutes. But she had heard enough. Background check. Inconsistencies. Could be a serious problem. She set down her coffee with a soft click against the Formica table. The challenge coin pressed against her ribs through the fabric of her scrub pocket, a weight that had somehow grown heavier in the past 48 hours. She had carried it for 20 years without thinking about it, the way you carry a scar, present but invisible until something makes you notice. Now it felt alive, pressing against her with the force of something demanding acknowledgement. She pressed her palm against it through the fabric, and the metal left an impression in her skin that faded slowly, like muscle memory trying to surface. Room 347 was quiet when she passed it on her way to check med counts for the evening shift. Through the small window in the door, she could see the green beret patient sitting up in bed, the television muted on a news broadcast about military deployments. She did not stop. She continued to the medication station where she would work within the carefully circumscribed boundaries that Caldwell had redrawn around her competence. By Friday afternoon, the personnel review had been scheduled for the following Monday. Gerald Hampstead delivered the news with the discomfort of a man who knew the script but was uncomfortable delivering it. Just routine, Elena. Nothing to worry about. External verification for credentialing purposes. You'll meet with a consultant from the State Review Board. Standard process. Probably just a paperwork thing. The words came fast, the way someone talks when they are trying not to make eye contact. He was looking at her shoulder, not her face. Your file should be perfectly fine. Should be. The conditional tense hung in the air between them. When? Elena asked. Monday 2 p.m. Conference room B. She nodded once and turned back to her work. She did not ask questions. She did not express concern. She did not show the calculation that was happening behind her eyes, the accounting of time, the assessment of available options, the professional soldier's habit of running scenarios. She had been marked. The system that Caldwell controlled was now processing her removal like a body disposing of a foreign object. The machinery of bureaucracy moved slowly, but it moved with relentless precision, and she had nothing in her official history to defend herself with. Elena Martinez, the civilian nurse, had a thin file and inconsistent employment history. Elena Martinez, the Master Chief Petty Officer, was officially dead, her service redacted, her existence a classified footnote that could not be produced in a conference room. That evening, around 8 p.m., she was entering room 347 to check the Green Beret patient's vitals. His name was Marcus Webb. He had been in Cedar Creek for 6 days. His chart indicated a severe infection from a contaminated wound sustained in a vehicle accident outside of Houston, the cover story for whatever his actual operational status might be. He was recovering well, the antibiotics working, his fever declining. The monitors showed steady vital signs and improving oxygen saturation. He should have been sleeping. Instead, he was awake, watching her as she approached the monitors. "You kept the coin," he said quietly. Elena's hands did not hesitate on the blood pressure cuff. Her voice, when she spoke, was level. "Patient comfort assessment, Captain." "It's not Captain anymore." He watched her work with an intensity that felt archaeological, as if he was digging through layers to find something buried. "It's Marcus." He paused. "And you kept the coin because you remembered." "I remember too. You were smaller than you are now. Younger hands. But the same hands. The same way you move." His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of certainty. "I knew the moment you walked into this room." Elena's jaw clenched. A small muscle worked at the hinge, and then it stopped. She checked the monitor readings and moved toward the medication cart. "Your vitals are stable. Pain management acceptable. That scar on your wrist," Marcus continued, not moving. "Shrapnel pattern. I've seen those before. My brothers have them. Guys who were there." He swallowed. "You stayed in the dust for 17 hours with me. You wrapped my leg with your own bandages." His voice cracked slightly. "You gave me that coin and told me it was luck. That it was going to keep me safe." Elena pulled a syringe from the cart. The motion was precise and automatic, muscle memory from a decade of medical training overlaid on top of a prior decade of tactical precision. She returned to the line and injected the antibiotic slowly. "Your medication is running. You need rest." She did not look at his face. She could not afford to look at his face. If she looked at his face, she would see the 8-year-old child he had been, would see the blood and the heat and the weight of him in her arms while explosions walked across the landscape like artillery. "Get some sleep, patient." "I'm going to remember you came here," Marcus said. "Not if you know what's good for you." Elena set down the syringe with a click sharper than she intended. "Whatever you think you remember, whatever you believe happened, it doesn't exist. Not officially. Not here." She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, something shifted in the room's pressure, like doors closing and locks engaging. When she looked away, she was no longer the deferential nurse. "You're stable. You'll be discharged Tuesday. Your injury is healing well. Recommend you see a civilian physician for follow-up wound care." Marcus did not respond. He simply nodded and lay back against his pillows as she left the room. In the parking lot at 9:22 p.m., Elena stood beside her car for 10 minutes without getting in. The Houston night was thick and warm, the kind of weather that felt like breathing through a wet cloth. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, ambulance or fire truck moving through the city toward someone else's emergency. Her hand was in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the challenge coin until the metal began to warm from her body heat. The edges of it pressed into her palm, leaving small crescents of pressure that faded slowly. She had carried this coin for 20 years without anyone knowing what it meant. She had buried her rank, her service, her unit designation, her entire operational history under the careful construction of a civilian identity. And in 6 days, a man who had been a child in Helmand Province had recognized her, had named her as something other than what she appeared to be. The coin pressed harder. Monday was going to come whether she was ready or not. The consultant would arrive at 2 p.m. The conference room would be arranged with a table and uncomfortable chairs. Caldwell would have prepared his case with the thoroughness of a man orchestrating a surgical removal. He had already called her references. He had already planted seeds in the administration. He had already orchestrated her isolation through medication access restrictions and shift reassignments. The machinery was moving forward, and there was no protocol in Cedar Creek Medical that could protect a nurse who had nowhere to stand. She got in her car and drove home without turning on the radio. 3:01 in the morning. Elena stood in room 347, checking the green Beret's monitor for the 3rd time that hour, when his numbers began to drop like a stone through deep water. Blood pressure cascading, 140, 120, 95. The monitor screamed its electronic wail. His neck veins distended, thick as rope against his skin. Muffled heart sounds. She knew the sound. She'd heard it in Helmand dust, heard it in the bodies of soldiers dying from something invisible, something that crushed from the inside. Cardiac tamponade. Blood pooling in the sac around his heart, collapsing the chambers, stopping everything. 15 minutes. Maybe less. She paged Dr. Caldwell. Overhead operator confirmed the message, voice crackling through the hospital PA. Elena waited. 60 seconds. The monitor kept screaming. Blood pressure 87 now. She paged again. This time she added the acuity code, critical patient, immediate response required. The monitor beeped once. Twice. His breathing came in gasps, a drowning man's rhythm, his chest heaving against the sheets. Oxygen sat dropping, 88, 82, 76. Elena moved without waiting for authorization. Muscle memory takes over when your brain recognizes a death in progress. She grabbed the ultrasound cart, her hands moving through the steps like a pilot executing an emergency descent. Probe into her pocket for the sterile gel. Monitor screen glowing ghostly blue in the dark room. There, the pericardial sac, bloated with blood, the heart chambers collapsed like a fist squeezing. She'd seen this before. She'd treated it before. Not in a hospital. Not with ultrasound machines. In a forward operating base outside Sanjin Valley with nothing but a combat medic's kit and the knowledge that if she didn't puncture that sac in the next 3 minutes, the man bleeding out on the stretcher in front of her would die. Protocol required physician authorization. Protocol required following the chain of command. Protocol was a luxury for people who had time. Elena prepped the skin with betadine, the antiseptic stinging in the fluorescent light. 14-gauge needle. She felt the give of skin, the resistance of muscle, the sudden softness as the needle breached the pericardial membrane. Bloody fluid rushed into the syringe like a dam breaking. The hiss of air escaping. 100 milliliters. 200. The heart monitor's pitch shifted incrementally upward. Blood pressure rising. 89. 92. 104. The patient's breathing deepened, slowed, his body finally getting oxygen instead of drowning from within. His eyes fluttered open. Gasped. Sinus rhythm, she whispered. The monitor confirmed her words with its steady beeping. The collapse reversed. The impossible became the expected. She was pulling the needle out, her hand steady as surgical steel, when Dr. Caldwell appeared in the doorway like a storm front. He took in the scene, the ultrasound machine, the bloody syringe on the tray, Elena's gloved hand still moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and his jaw tightened. "Who authorized this procedure?" His voice was flat as a blade. "Patient was in acute tamponade. You didn't respond to pages." He had minutes. Elena kept her voice level, her hands continuing their work, disposing of the needle, logging the procedure numbers, 1.8 liters of pericardial fluid, O2 sat stabilized at 96%, heart rate now at 88 and steady. Facts. Documentation. The irrefutable language of medicine. You performed an invasive procedure without physician authorization. Not a question. A statement. An accusation. His eyes moved from her to the patient, who was breathing easier now, color returning to his ashen face. The green beret's eyes found Elena's for a moment, the recognition there was subtle but undeniable. Caldwell didn't miss it. "Step outside." She didn't argue. That was her mistake, not arguing, not defending, not claiming the save as her own. She simply stepped into the corridor and let him see what he wanted to see, a nurse who'd overstepped, a woman who didn't know her place, a problem that could be solved by pressing the right buttons. By 0800 hours, Dr. Caldwell had made 3 calls. Elena found out about them through the network of whispers that moved through Cedar Creek Medical faster than email. First call, the chief of medical staff, delivered while Caldwell was in the locker room, voice quiet and concerned, "We have a credentialing issue. One of the night nurses performed an unsupervised pericardiocentesis. I'm concerned about her background. Her references are inconsistent." Second call, hospital legal. "I want documentation. I want her file flagged. If something goes wrong with that patient, we need clear evidence that her credentials were questioned." Third call, the outside investigator, the one Caldwell had contacted months ago when Elena had first corrected his medication order. "I need you to accelerate your review. I believe we're looking at fraud. False credentials. Maybe worse." The machinery moved with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. By 11:30, Elena's access to the medication dispensary had been suspended pending investigation. By 12:15, the hospital administrator had called HR. By 12:45, Elena's shift supervisor had been instructed to inform her of an immediate meeting. She walked into the HR office at 1 o'clock. 3 people waiting. The administrator. The HR director. Dr. Caldwell, sitting with his hands folded, his expression carefully arranged into sympathy. The fluorescent lights hummed their fluorescent hymn. The HR director slid a folder across the desk. "Ms. Martinez, we've been conducting a review of your credentials. Your references are not responding to our inquiries. Your background check has flagged some discrepancies. According to our military database queries, there's no record of anyone by your name serving in the armed forces. We need to understand how this is possible." Elena looked at the folder. Looked at them. "I served. You won't find a record." "That's impossible," the administrator said. His tone was apologetic, which somehow made it worse. "Everyone has records. I was involved in classified operations. My records were sealed. Erased, technically. You won't find them in any public database." Dr. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "I understand how difficult this is. But the hospital can't operate on faith alone. Our legal department has advised us that we cannot allow you to continue practicing without proper verification of your credentials. We're suspending your license pending a full investigation. Effective immediately." "You can't suspend." "Your badge," the HR director said quietly. She held out her hand. Elena looked at her own ID badge, the name and photograph staring back, a woman from a different lifetime. She unclipped it and placed it in the director's palm. The gesture was final. The click of a cell door closing. "We'll be in touch about severance," the administrator said. Elena didn't respond. She stood, turned, and walked out. The hallway of Cedar Creek Medical stretched in front of her, fluorescent and white and endless. A place she'd worked for 3 years without anyone knowing who she really was, and now that was the reason they wanted her gone. The quiet nurse. The one who showed up early, stayed late, never complained. The invisible woman who'd saved a man's life at 3 in the morning and was being removed from the building by 1300 hours because she'd done it without asking permission from someone who hadn't even answered his phone. She walked through the parking garage. Didn't see the security guard by the loading dock. Didn't see the people staring. She was already inside her head by then, already somewhere else, already gone. That evening, she stood in the hospital laundry room. Security had allowed her to collect her personal items, a few photographs, a coffee mug with the Cedar Creek logo, a bottle of hand lotion that smelled like lavender, and everything she was no longer. The laundry room was warm and humid, the industrial washers rumbling on their cycles like sleeping giants. Elena took her folded scrubs from her locker. 6 sets. Navy blue. Pressed and clean. They smelled of bleach and antiseptic and 16-hour shifts. She held one up to the light, remembering when they were white, when she was new, when nobody knew her name or cared that she didn't have one. She folded them one more time. Not because they needed folding, they were already folded, but because the motion was muscle memory, something her hands knew how to do without her brain having to authorize it. The same precision she'd once used to field strip a rifle in 42 seconds. The same discipline that had kept her alive in places where discipline was the difference between breathing and not breathing. Fold. Crease. Stack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each movement identical to the last. She placed them in the return bin and closed her eyes. The room smelled like industrial soap and defeat. She was still standing there when a security officer found her, asked if she needed anything else, and walked her to her car in silence. Elena's car sat 3 rows back in the parking lot, its door handle cold beneath her palm. 5 hours post-termination. The badge was gone. The scrubs were in a plastic bag on the passenger seat. She was reaching for the ignition when the ambulance bay doors erupted with motion, lights, voices, the controlled chaos of a level 1 trauma alert. She didn't turn. She didn't look. She was nobody now. But then the paramedics wheeled past her car, and she heard it. A voice in Pashto, thin with pain, speaking rapid words she hadn't heard in 20 years. Her hands went still on the steering wheel. The patient on the stretcher locked eyes with her through the windshield. His face was blooded, his left arm wrapped tight, but his eyes widened with the kind of recognition that doesn't belong in a Houston parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday. He opened his mouth. One word, spoken with the force of a classified file being unsealed. Phantom. Elena's breath caught. Not her name. Her operational call sign. A word that existed only in declassified documents locked in Pentagon vaults, attached to a Master Chief Petty Officer who'd been officially dead for 20 years. She sat motionless as the paramedics rushed him inside. 2 minutes passed. Maybe 3. Then she stepped out of her car and walked back towards Cedar Creek Medical's emergency entrance, moving like someone pulled by a current too strong to resist. The security guard at the loading dock was a veteran. You could tell by the way he held himself, the cadence of his breathing, the scar tissue around his eyes that came from things no civilian would understand. He stopped her as she passed. "Ms. Martinez, you're not on shift." "I know." Her voice had shifted. Dropped an octave. "The patient they just brought in." "The car accident." "What did he say when he came in?" The guard's jaw tightened. "How did you?" "What did he say?" "He said your name." Or, he said something. In another language. Farsi or something. The guard's eyes narrowed. "Arabic maybe." "You speak that?" "Pashto." Elena's voice was flat. "He said phantom." The guard's face went white. Not pale. White. The color of recognition hitting like a physical blow. He stepped backward, his hand moving to his radio. Hold on. He keyed the MIC, spoke low and urgent. This is security. I need to reach command. Full secure line. Now. The radio crackled back with resistance. The guard cut it off. This is Sergeant Michael Hollowell, 160th SAW Night Stalkers, veteran standing down in Houston. I'm calling it in. Full red flag. Witnessed a classified operational security breach at Cedar Creek Medical. This is not a drill. 15 minutes later, the administration office filled with people in suits who moved like they'd been trained to move, with the quiet precision of federal agents who'd done this before. Caldwell stood among them, his silver hair still perfect, his authority still visible in the rigid set of his shoulders. But something had shifted in the room, a pressure change, like oxygen being pulled from the air. The general walked in last. 2 stars on his shoulder, lines in his face that came from decisions no one else had been qualified to make, eyes that had seen things the average hospital administrator couldn't imagine. He moved to the desk, set down a tablet, and began to read. Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez. Navy SEAL Reconnaissance Operative. Silver Star. He paused. The words hung there like a grenade with the pin pulled. 3 Purple Hearts. Operation Cyclone Commander. Officially deceased as of 2004. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. Caldwell's face shifted. A flash of confusion, then something darker. He opened his mouth. General, if we had known about Ms. Martinez's background and potential PTSD concerns. Step back, Doctor. Caldwell stepped back. The general turned to face Elena. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes, or recognition, respect, the look of a commanding officer seeing one of his own, shifted the entire architecture of the room. The door to the hallway opened. The green beret stood there in a hospital gown, for still taped to his arm, the morphine making him move like someone walking through water. But his posture was rigid. Military. Functional despite the pain. Sir. He saluted, the gesture awkward but deliberate. His eyes locked on Elena. That woman saved my life when I was 8 years old in San Juan Valley, Helmand Province. American operator. We were taking contact from 3 positions. Insurgent fire from the ridgeline. She covered me with her body. Shrapnel went through her shoulder. She carried me 17 hours through enemy territory. Collapsed at the wire. His voice cracked. I wouldn't be standing here if she didn't. He reached into the pocket of his gown. His hands trembled, whether from pain or from the weight of what he was about to do, Elena couldn't tell. He produced a coin. Tarnished. Worn smooth by 20 years of being pressed against skin, carried through deserts and deployments and the kind of survival that changes a person at the molecular level. She gave this to me when I could barely stay conscious. Told me to keep it close. Told me I was going to make it. He extended it toward Elena. I never forgot. I have no idea how you ended up here, in this hospital, but when I saw your face in that bay, I knew. Elena took the coin. The metal was warm from his pocket, and holding it was like holding compressed time, 20 years folded into her palm, the weight of it suddenly impossible to carry alone. Caldwell watched this exchange. Watched the moment his institutional authority vaporized. She saw the calculation cross his face: assess, adapt, survive. His phone was already in his hand. Over the next 48 hours, working overnight in his office with the door locked, Caldwell made his fatal decision. He accessed Elena's personnel file and began creating documentation that had never existed. Psychiatric evaluation recommendations. Incident reports with timestamps from 3 weeks ago. Behavioral concerns meticulously noted in hospital systems that he believed were secure, invisible, bulletproof. He was precise. Professional. Every file modification looked like a clinical decision, not the desperate work of a man whose entire architecture was collapsing. What he didn't know was that the moment the general made certain calls, Cedar Creek Medical's network was flagged by federal investigation. Every keystroke was being captured. Every file modification logged. Every timestamp alteration recorded and timestamped by servers that belonged to people who had been hunting people far more dangerous than a hospital administrator for 3 decades. When the FBI agent walked into his office 72 hours later, Caldwell still believed he held authority. "I don't appreciate the intrusion," he said, straightening his tie. "I'm the chief of surgery at this hospital, and whatever you think you need to." The agent set the tablet on his desk. Forensic audit. Digital reconstruction of every file he'd created, every keystroke he'd typed, every moment he'd tried to rewrite the institutional record. The agent's voice was neutral. Clinical. Document forgery. Obstruction of justice. Fraud. "We can do this here or at the federal courthouse. Your choice." Caldwell's face went the color of old bone. The board's emergency meeting lasted 90 minutes. The vote to terminate and cooperate fully with federal prosecution was unanimous. His attorney negotiated desperately, but digital evidence doesn't negotiate. It doesn't hesitate. It simply exists, permanent and absolute. 6 months later, Elena stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes in full dress uniform, insignia restored, 20 years of erasure finally reversed. The Master Chief Petty Officer rank badge caught the light like it had been waiting for this moment. The Navy Cross hung at her chest, the citation reading portions of Operation Cyclone that could finally be declassified. 17 hours. Carry. Fire. Wounded child. Friendly lines. The Green Beret stood to her right. Both arms intact now. No more hospital gown. Dress blues that fit him like they were tailored by people who understood that uniform meant something. He stood at attention and didn't blink. When the general pinned the medal, Elena's hand trembled slightly. Not from fear. From the weight of 20 years finally being acknowledged, finally being real. Across Houston, in a folding chair behind a folding table outside a strip mall, Dr. Caldwell sat selling cut-rate insurance policies to people who didn't recognize him. His medical license was permanently revoked. His plea agreement had spared him prison but destroyed everything: reputation, career, the institutional authority he'd spent his life accumulating. His phone buzzed with another rejection, the 14th hospital administrator position he'd been denied in 6 months. At Cedar Creek Medical, the new chief of surgery implemented a protocol named after Elena: mandatory second opinions for patient removal decisions, whistleblower protections, credential verification that looked deeper than surface databases. The hospital understood now. Sometimes the person folding towels in the laundry room was holding the entire institution together. Elena transferred to the VA hospital in Northwest Houston. Her badge read Clinical Director. The operators who came through those doors recognized her immediately, not from her face, but from the way she moved, the way she listened, the way her hands were steady when yours were shaking. They didn't ask about her past. They didn't need to. They could see it in how she treated wounds that didn't show on any X-ray. The Green Beret visited on Thursdays. He always left a challenge coin at the nurse's station. Different coins each time, some from his unit, some from deployments, some from people he'd served beside who couldn't leave their own. A collection of small metal tributes to the people who'd taught him what it meant to survive. If you've ever been underestimated by someone in power, if you've ever kept your true self hidden while the world made assumptions, if you've ever wondered whether integrity actually matters, subscribe and hit that notification bell. These stories aren't just about heroes. They're about the ones standing next to you every day, the quiet ones holding everything together while the rest of us weren't paying attention. Comment below, what would you do if your entire past was suddenly revealed? And if this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to know that the quietest person in the room might be holding it all together.